In surveying thousands of engineers, we've identified one of the key drivers of great engineering managers to be their ability to support the career development of their teams. In this episode of the Engineering Career Coach podcast, we're going to talk to Seth Scheilz, a professional engineer at Black Veatch, about how he focused on developing his team and how it helped them grow and him grow as well in the process. Let's jump right in. All right, now I'm excited to welcome our guest for today, Seth Scheilz. Seth is a professional engineer at Black Veatch in Kansas City. Seth, welcome to the Engineering Career Coach podcast.
Anthony, thanks for having me on today.
So Seth volunteered to come on the podcast because one of the things that we've kind of been investigating in building our assessment tool for great engineering managers, one of these key drivers that we found is the ability to support the growth of your team members or your staff or your employees in terms of their own professional development. And Seth, when I put that out there, it seems like this was a topic that's of interest to you.
Yeah, it is. So today I want to go through a couple different items that I've come across reading and some stuff that I've experienced learning with my teams and how to help people develop their skill sets and grow in their careers.
So Seth, before we dive into this, just to give everyone a little bit of a reference point here in terms of teams, either you're managing or, how many people are you working with today that you get to practice some of these strategies with?
Right now, I'm working in our data centers group. It's a newer team that I joined this spring, so I don't have any direct reports. We're working on growing that team, so you kind of think of it as a small business within inside of a larger corporation. But previous to this, I worked in our telecom group. At that time, I led teams, design teams, and also some field professionals, upwards of 40, 45 professionals across engineering and CAD technicians.
Great. And so in terms of this whole idea of supporting your team members in terms of their own professional development, is this something that for you, something that you just recognized that was important? Did something happen for you specifically? How did you become interested in this?
Really kind of the first time I thought I got a taste of this and I really liked development of people was when I was in college. I did my undergrad at the University of Missouri, and I was part of a concrete canoe team. So anybody that's got a civil engineering background or just engineering in general, they've been on student competition teams. And I understood the technical aspects of building a concrete canoe and things like that. But I really liked it when I could find somebody that had a passion for concrete or had a passion for the construction aspect of putting a mold together and just kind of giving them opportunities to dive in deep into that passion. I found that very rewarding. And so then from there, I've worked to try to find opportunities where I can kind of assess people's skill sets. I can understand what they want to achieve in their career in the next few years, and then try to help them grow their skill set and identify opportunities to progress.
That's great because, from our research, we've really found that of these four key drivers, the idea of, my manager really supports my career growth is probably the one that stands out the most in people that, they say that the most, that my manager is a great manager because he or she is really promoting me in my career. So this is definitely an important one. I'm glad that you've recognized it and that we're going to get to kind of pick your brain here in terms of some of the things that you've done. So to that end, we've got four specific kind of strategies or action items that we're going to kind of cover here. The first one being how biology impacts behavior. Let's get into that one a little bit, Seth.
Yeah, no problem. So this comes from Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. So Simon, he's published several books. He's got a great TED Talk that people could go out and watch on YouTube and elsewhere. But he gets into it, and it's just talking about different hormones in the brain. So you really kind of break down into three groups. You have your independent hormones, so endorphins and dopamine. You have interdependent ones, which are serotonin and oxytocin. And then you have kind of the fight or flight one, which is cortisol. And so that really drives a lot of how we act and interact with each other.
That's interesting because I think that in terms of management, a lot of managers aren't sitting around thinking about these chemicals in the body per se.
Yeah.
But, from my own research as well, and I've read quite a bit of Sinek's work, it's important because that determines how people relate to you and interact with you. And in terms of, great managers, if you want to get that interaction and the relationships with your team that can help you build a strong team, you need to think about how they're going to be reacting to things based on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in terms of this point, what are some things, Seth, that you need to, what's the benefit of being aware of this? Is it just help to drive some of your interactions with people?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think probably the three to kind of focus on are the serotonin, the oxytocin, and the cortisol. So the first two deal with human interactions. So with serotonin, you're dealing with pride of accomplishment. Basically, you could have two parties, multiple parties, and one might be sacrificing for the good of the other. So if you think of like a college graduation, parents, they're sacrificing for their children, their education to be better and to achieve that degree. And so when that student walks across the stage, not only is the student feeling pride in that accomplishment, but the parents are as well. So it's a team effort. When you think of the workplace, a promotion could be that way. I remember that the first time I had a professional that was promoted underneath me, and I could see their growth over time. I could go to my boss and say, hey, here's what this person's doing. They're knocking it out of the park. I think we should consider them for a promotion. When the promotion was approved, like, not only is the professional excited, but then like there's, that serotonin inside me, like I'm excited too. I'm happy that they're growing and they're being recognized for that growth. So it's a two-part system. Then when you kind of get into oxytocin, this is acts of generosity. You're building trust among the team, and you can kind of get into the safety and vulnerability with each other. And so as you build that trust, you're willing to take more risks with those people. So those are the kind of the team building hormones. On the other side of it, you have cortisol. So cortisol is very much kind of that gut feeling that something's not right. There could be a threat. And it's made for a short-term response. So if you think maybe like a fire, the point is to get out of a burning building, get to safety. So it's good on the short term, but in long-term situations, which office environments can produce this long-term response, and it creates stress and anxiety. So as a manager, you have to understand the environment the people are working in and make sure that there aren't rumors going on, lies or backstabbing, office politics, any of those things that we all know is bad for a work setting. If they persist, it will drive up cortisol levels, and it creates stress, anxiety. If all those are involved, it also prevents serotonin and oxytocin from existing. So it's kind of, the opposite side of the coin.
Right. And it can also, I believe, make people defensive, right? Like if they can act more on the defensive as opposed to being like proactive or just being comfortable in the work that they're doing, you tend to make decisions because you don't want to be, called out on it or something along those lines, if all those other things are surrounding you that you mentioned.
Right. So people will start putting up individual barriers to protect themselves. You'll start to lose team collaboration, and then it can spiral downward from there. So as a manager, it's something to be aware of working to promote trust, promote accomplishment among the team, and work to remove rumors and office politics, things like that.
Yeah, and I think this is great stuff in terms of, the corporate workplace. And I think that you'll see a lot of analogies for this in your own life outside of work, potentially. I know for me, as Seth is rattling some of those off, I do have young kids and I coach a lot of their sports. And you're coaching a sports team and you see somebody make a great play as the coach, to be able to go up to them and say, hey, that was a great play right there. You're doing a great job. Or not to say that can certainly, cause these different reactions, right? Like reinforcing the good behaviors. And so, this can apply, I think, in all aspects of leadership, parenting, teaching, corporate management. It's an important aspect not to be overlooked in how people's physical makeup, drives their response and maybe their future performance, so to speak. So I think that this was a really good one to start with. All right. So transitioning into the second one is leader versus leader follower. Talk about that one, Seth.
Yeah, so this comes from Turn the Ship Around by David Marquette. He was a retired captain from the U.S. Navy. And so he is tasked with leading a submarine, the USS Santa Fe. So it's 135 men, $2 billion vessel. So a lot of
no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure, right? A lot of responsibility there. And so previously there'd been some turnover issues and some morale issues with that. So prior to taking over that boat, he was training to lead a different submarine. So you have different classes, different setups. So he was training for a specific one, and then as he approached his time to lead, they said, actually, we need you to go lead the USS Santa Fe. So he's getting involved with that. And leader versus leader follower is something that he worked on developing with his crew during his commissioning of that ship. So leader is basically teaching and pushing decision-making authority and knowledge down the chain of command. So I would say more of a typical hierarchy, especially in the corporate world, traditionally has been leader-follower. Decisions are made at the top and they come down. So this is working on training people up so that they understand the whole chain of command, and it gives them, with that knowledge, more freedom to make decisions. So basically what you're looking at is leader is developing a system for long-term success after the current leader is no longer present, after that tenure. So it's taking a long-term view of the team, the company, the organization to set it down a path for long-term success.
Interesting. So basically the philosophy is, when you're doing leading, delegation, training of any sort, you're doing it with the mentality of, I want to help this person replace me.
Right. So if you want to think about it from maybe, I wouldn't say a selfish side, but if you want to think about it in a way that you want to be promoted yourself, if you don't have anybody on your team that can fill your spot when you move on to your next role, it may be hard to convince your boss to promote you to that next opportunity. So by training your replacement allows you the freedom then to go on and tackle your next challenge.
Allows you to progress in your career, essentially.
Exactly.
That's great. And so that's, probably in some ways, I don't want to say easier said than done, but I think, people could grapple with that a little bit. They might think like they're, leading themselves out of the job. But to your point, one way to think about it is you're leading yourself to the next step, and you have to have a strong support team to help you take over your current position. What are some other things that you need to think about if you're kind of going through that mentality?
So I guess one of the benefits I like of leader is if you have an individual that's making all the decisions at the top and instructing people what to do, you're limited based on that individual's skill set, their knowledge, their past experience, their abilities. And we can get into that with some scenarios from the book where if they would have relied solely on one individual's experience, there would have been a failure. Whereas when you train people and help them develop and grow, you're spreading the responsibility across the team. Now, ultimately, the person at the top is still in charge, but they can delegate some of those tasks and some of the knowledge and decision-making, which then reduces that point of failure in any one person because the team is stronger as a whole.
So you're kind of like, in a sense, like kind of minimizing risks to the team overall, because you're diversifying in terms of the different skill sets that are available to the team at that point, because it's not just you anymore. You have maybe a couple of people that you've trained with different skill sets, so they eliminate some of the gaps that might have been there in the past.
Exactly.
That's interesting. And I guess if you do that, if you take this leader approach, you can take a very methodical approach with it, where You can look at the person that you're training or the people that you're training to take over your position, and you can say, here are the skill sets you need for this position. Here are some of the experiences that would be beneficial. So we either need to train people in these different experiences or skill sets, or find people that have some of them and help them to hone them, or something along those lines.
Right. So I think it's good as a supervisor has been in a job position for a while. They understand for the most part what's required to do that job successfully, so they can list out those skills and requirements, and then go through with the direct report and say, what are your skill sets? What do you have? And kind of compare the two. From that, you can look at any areas that need improvement or need growth and work on a plan with the individual to grow their skill set and help better prepare them for the next opportunity.
Great. So we've got the first one, we talked about the kind of the physical makeup or the physiological makeup of someone, considering that in your communication with them and your actions. The second one, we've talked about, leader approach, where you're training people to ultimately replace you so you can continue to progress. And now we get into the third one, which I like and I think is sometimes underrated, which is the feedback process. Talk about feedback.
Yeah. So this kind of dawned on me early on when I was leading a team that um, the team was performing well, but I was kind of wanting more. It had to do with some of our documentation of how to document things in spreadsheets, and then how we're going to review that, the drawings that go with those calculations. Um, and then I realized like I hadn't instructed or told my team that that was a value to put information in a notes section in the spreadsheet, that I'm going to use that to review drawings. I hadn't told them. I mean, it's not, I mean, to have them figure that out on their own, that's not realistic necessarily. It's not fair, maybe. Um, and so what I decided to do was to set up monthly meetings with them. So 30 minutes every month. One of the big reasons, if it's on the calendar every month, it shows that both the supervisor and the individual are committed. Also, on a monthly basis, it allows the individual some time to make some improvements that can be measurable. If you give somebody feedback and then you come back the next week, I don't know how much progress they may have made. Maybe, depends on the skill set. But on a month, it's more measurable, I think. So a good book where I learned about that is Permission to Screw Up by Kristen Hadid. And she talks about kind of giving feedback in three ways, and it's feelings, behaviors, and impact. So start with the person that's giving the feedback. Start with their feelings, how the situation makes them feel. This reduces, kind of argumentative conflict between the individuals, because it's one person's feelings. It's kind of hard to dispute somebody else's feelings. The second one is the behavior of the individual you're giving feedback to. Either you can use this both ways, either of areas for improvement, what may be lacking, or in recognition of what they're doing well. And then the third one is the area of impact. So how does that behavior create a positive or negative? And by being specific with these three, it then gives people, it either shows them areas where they need to improve and why, or it shows them what they're doing well and it acknowledges their contribution.
That's great. I love, first of all, just the whole idea of feedback, I think is super important, and not kind of given, that opportunity is not given enough. But what I really feel is one of the biggest challenges in the engineering world in terms of, manager or supervisor and staff relationships and just career development and progression, is we tend to have these annual performance reviews,
Mm-hmm.
where we meet with we meet with our supervisor once a year. We fill out a, kind of like, sometimes it's a generic form, not for everybody, but in a lot of cases, you give the form in, they might review it a couple hours before your talk, and then you may not talk about it again for another year. And I think that just sends it's not a very authentic message to the person working, the person trying to strive for success, because it seems like there's not a lot of attention focused on their development. But in this process that you've laid out here, where you have monthly meetings, as you said, it shows commitment for both parties, that they're committed to improve and to get better. And really what it tells me is that, in terms of just general career progression, if you're working on it on a monthly basis as opposed to a yearly basis, it's obvious that there's much more interest shown to the progression of that individual,
Right.
right? As opposed to the yearly review.
Yeah, and I think, if there's something that's pressing, I say don't even wait a month. If
Right.
it's an issue that needs to be dealt with that's negative, deal with it before it can get worse. And if it's something that somebody did that goes above and beyond the expectation, I say recognize them for it. Don't wait. Because to your point, if you wait a year or even a month, could be too long. But if you wait a year and this coming January we meet and you give me feedback on what I did well or didn't do well from last February, my first thought is, why'd you wait so long to tell me? I've been doing something wrong since February. I wish you would have told me. I could have fixed it and moved on.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, I think that there is a place for the annual review, I think, but for immediate feedback, you got to be having this ongoing conversation on some regular interval, and then in between as required.
Yeah. And I think if I'm putting myself in the perspective of the working engineer for a moment, and I'm meeting on an annual basis, it's much easier for me to say, last month you told me to try to work on some of these things, and I've been working on them. And I think I've made some progress, just because, you know, it's not that long of a time period for me to come in and say, a year ago you told me to work on these things, but a lot has happened in the last 12 months and those things might not even be relevant anymore. So I just think that the bite-sized, versus a year, a month is really more of a bite-sized kind of time frame to be able to really focus and do continuous improvement. I think continuous improvement is important, and I think that this allows that. So I like that a lot. So that's something for those of you out there listening. Really think about implementing this feedback, this regular feedback. We've done it here at EMI actually with our staff because they've asked for it, and it's been extremely helpful. I mean, and that's the other thing. Most of the time, if you have something to tell someone that's critical, I mean, yes, you might have praise for them as well, but if you have something critical, I find that most motivated people want to understand it so that they can fix it and improve.
Right, right. And so what I say with areas of improvement, I say start in person, have that face-to-face conversation. If you're not in the same location, have it by phone. Don't start with email. If you need to follow up with documentation, then yeah, do so as necessary. But start face-to-face. In my experience, most items, once I've given that feedback, because people want to improve, items have been resolved in 1 to 3 months. Then once areas of improvement are kind of taken care of, then you can focus on where that person really wants to grow and where they want to get to. And you can spend those monthly meetings talking about how to get them to the next level, which becomes a lot of fun. Those are enjoyable conversations.
Yeah, and it seems to me too like you're putting much more of an emphasis on their development, which is what this whole episode is about, right? By having these monthly meetings as opposed to just, getting together once a year and talking about their progression. So, and that's what we're stressing through this series that we're doing, is that this is one of the things that engineers have said, this is why my manager is great, because they focus on my progression. And this is the best way to do it.
One thing I would add to that, even as a direct report, I don't think there's anything wrong going to your supervisor saying that you want to meet on a monthly basis and do that. I've done that with supervisors before too, and they had no problem doing it, and they were willing to provide feedback. I just don't think it was probably something as engineers. It's not the first thing that's on top of mind, so we have to make more of an effort to do it. But once I asked to do it, there was no pushback. They said, "Yeah, we'll meet every month and then give me feedback on areas to grow." And I mean, that's ultimately what it takes to, I think, have a successful career.
Yeah, that's great. I agree 100%. If you're out there listening, you may not be the supervisor, you may be the person, working for that person right now, and getting the feedback's only going to help you. And sometimes you need to ask for it. Like a lot of things in your career, you ask and you'll receive it. All right, we're going to take a break here. We're going to come back in a minute for our Take Action Today segment with Seth. We're going to get some of his thoughts on how he's integrated some of these different strategies and then kind of wrap this one up for you. So stick around. All right, we're back with Seth Scheilz, professional engineer at Black Veatch. We're talking about, of course, really engaging with your staff as a supervisor and really focusing on their professional development, their career progression. Seth has talked about 3 specific strategies or kind of actions around doing that. The first one being, considering the biology behind it, how people react based on serotonin, cortisol, etc. He talked about the leader mentality from the book Turn the Ship Around, which is really focusing on training someone to be your replacement as one strategy for focusing on someone's development and helping yourself progress as well. And lastly, he spoke about feedback, ensuring that you have regular meetings to give feedback or ask for feedback with your supervisor or your team. And so, Seth, at this point, I'd like to ask you if you could share a story from your career around how you integrated some of these strategies with your team.
Yeah. So going back a couple of years, I had a new project, had several engineering technicians. We're putting a team together to design high-speed fiber optic networks, so high-speed internet to the home and businesses for a large telecommunications company. And so, we started out and the focus was working on quality. It was working on meeting schedule, going from there. So as we started to progress and we had figured the quality and the schedule aspects out, got that going, it was about how do we start developing talent, right? We're checking the basic boxes, but people want to grow. And this is kind of where I started implementing the 30-minute monthly meetings. So we could hash out any smaller items, which further, made us more efficient, improved quality. We're getting faster. We're on schedule. And then also it gave me a chance to really see where people wanted to go. What I learned from that is on a team of 4 engineers, I had 2 that aspired to have my position. And I had one that was very focused on the technical side. And so then I could help them develop that. The 2 that wanted to have my position, we started focusing on the skill sets they needed to achieve that. The guy that wanted to go down the technical path, I could help him and look for opportunities for him to further strengthen that skill set to be that expert on.
Seth, before you go forward, when you had these meetings, are these individual with each one of them or together?
No, they're individual.
Okay, individual.
So yeah, so I'd meet with each professional individually. So like I said, I had 4 of them. So every Monday at a certain time, I just met with a different one. So rotating through the month. So I always had something on my calendar, but every week it was a different individual. And then the 4th engineer, he was a younger guy. So we were working on the quality skill set because he joined the team later than the rest of us. So from that, as we progressed across the summer, we'd been on the project for about a year. The client came to us and they said, "Hey, you guys are doing great work. We want to expand the footprint. We want you to do more work for us," which is great. From that, we need to build more teams. So talking to my boss, he said, "Hey, I want you to go work on this new expanded footprint. What options do we have for somebody to take your spot?" And I said, "We have multiple candidates." And so one of those individuals then stepped up into my position and started leading the team. And then the younger engineer could move up into a position to play on a bigger role as there. And, the team didn't miss a beat. They kept delivering high quality work on time as promised. And then the new market, I worked with my boss to identify people to join the team. Same thing, working on quality and schedule, and then delivering on time as promised. So I think that's a good example of showing leader, where as new opportunities came up, I went to the new opportunity. The individual that I'd been working with stepped into my role, person underneath him stepped into his role, and we just kept going.
Yeah, and that's a really good example, I think, of the leader and the feedback together, right? Because you did the feedback meetings monthly to start to learn about them. And as part of the result of the feedback meetings, you said, well, these 2 individuals really want to take the next step and get to where I am, so I can focus on helping them do that, again, where that leader mentality kicks in.
Right.
So that's a real good example. Right. So to wrap this up, Seth, we'd like to leave our listeners with some kind of action that they can take to think about this and kind of put this and transfer it back to the job for them. And so for me, just, being someone that, is just learning all this from you today, if I'm thinking of something that I can take and start to do with relative ease, it would be if I am, if I have a supervisor, I can ask that supervisor for regular feedback. And if I am a supervisor, I can ask my team if we can meet on a regular basis and have that feedback. in terms of doing that, is there any recommendations that you would have for someone in asking for that, or a certain, strategy around doing that effectively that you can leave us with?
Yeah, so I would say that traditionally engineers we're trained for technical skills. It's not top of mind to develop talent, but ultimately when we get into a managerial position, that's what we have to do. So as a manager, you have to get something on the calendar. That's the first thing. Schedule something on the calendar, talk to your people about why you're doing it, explain the why. That helps. And it's to work on improving their skill sets, understanding where they want to advance. If you're an individual on the other side, I think you just go to your supervisor in person, have that conversation, say, hey, I want to grow. I need your input. I need your help. I want to set up a monthly meeting to talk about these, and just have a high level agenda, areas that you want to focus on, whether it's technical, it's managerial, it's financial, wherever an individual wants to grow. And then also ask kind of for an open area. Maybe there's a blind spot. The individual doesn't know they need skill improvement there, but the supervisor might recognize it. So then you can just say, and any additional information.
That's great. I mean, I think the challenge with this sometimes is, as a working engineer, it could be a little overwhelming to go to your supervisor and ask for something like this. But I think what you need to think about is the perspective of the supervisor. And if someone's coming to them, asking for them, telling you that they want to improve and they want your advice, it's really something that they would see as extremely positive. And
Right.
so sometimes it's just getting over that little bit of nervousness that you might have in asking for that. And I had a staff member ask me about that recently, and I thought it was a great idea. And I told her, I think we should definitely incorporate it, because it's just a win-win for everybody, for you, the team, the organization as a whole.
I agree with that. Yes.
All right. So Seth Scheilz, professional engineer, Black Veatch, thank you so much for spending some time with us here on the Engineering Career Coach podcast and giving us some strategies and kind of action items for really, helping your team progress, which we've definitely identified as a key driver. Thank you so much, Seth.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate being on the podcast.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please leave your comments and/or questions in the comments section below this video. Also, if you'd like to view the full show notes for this episode, visit engineeringmanagementinstitute.org or see the link in the video description. There you will find the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during the episode. Until next time, I wish you the best in all of your engineering career endeavors.